Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Headless. I'm Paul Greenberg, and this is episode 14. Uh, Before we get to our guest, I want to sort of fill you in on the evolution of the show itself because every single time I do it, something is changing. If you remember, it started out as an audio podcast a long time ago, and those episodes aren't even counted in this overall thing. And it had some traction, but I didn't like the idea of an audio podcast all that much. So I went to a live stream show. And then, if you remember, the way the live stream show was going to be, it was going to be Talking Headless Me. And that was it. And I was going to talk 20, 25 minutes about one company. It could have been, you remember I talked about Salesforce, I talked about ServiceNow, some of the other ones, and then do a segment called Something I Really, and then go through something I really dislike and like. And I liked that. It took a lot of preparation, but I did like it. And then a few weeks ago, if you watched, and I know some of you did, I had Scott Nelson from Gartner on, and Scott, as you know, runs the analyst programs for CRM, CX, ERP, and AI. And we talked kind of about how to handle unruly analysts, basically. And then I really kind of liked that conversation a lot. So we had Robin Schaefer on last week talking about AR and dealing with analysts via the AR side. And I realized from the standpoint of the show, I really enjoy these kind of conversations, not only being an analyst and talking about a company, which is what we pretty much do, but talking with analysts and AR people about the actual role of an analyst and of AR. So the show, if going forward from really Scott on, will be that kind of conversation. The other thing, which you may have noticed if you've watched the show at all up to this week at any time, my background's different now. I didn't like it that much. Really, it was a little boring. So I decided to get a new background to let it pop a bit, and we did that. So that's where we stand. What you see with this background, with that idea going forward, still be monthly for the time being. I'm just getting back from California where I did an advisory day with a company. So, I had to kind of move fast here. But luckily, and wonderfully, this week got this awesome guest who actually is the guy who came up with the topic. And that's a very esteemed industry analyst, and he covers the whole enterprise, Vinnie Mirchandani. Vinnie, if you don't know him, and I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't know him, Vinnie is a former Gartner analyst. He covers the entire enterprise. Let's say this: any vendor who's anything understands that they're going to, one way or the other, they're going to have to communicate with Vinnie. That almost sounds like given his first name, it almost sounds like his last name should be Italian, right? And you communicate or else. But Vinnie is the author of multiple books. He is author of 4 books, and you'll see a banner scrolling occasionally, which will give you the names of the books. But my 2 favorites were SAP 3.0, and my real favorite was called The New Polymath, which is the one I love. And see, that's one thing about Vinnie, which I think a lot of people may or may not know. If you've read any of his stuff, you know this. If you haven't, you may not. Vinnie doesn't just cover the industry. He covers the world, right? And he covers culture, and he covers science, and he covers art, and he covers philosophy, and he covers literature. I mean, he's covering a broad range, but he ties it all together, in the forces that are moving the world in some way. And he does it really well. So what we're going to talk about today is, okay, we're in a world of tumult, change, drama, and we're still industry analysts. What does that mean, though, for that entire idea, much less me and him? So with that, I'd like to bring on the incredibly well-regarded Vinnie Mirchandani. Hey, Vinnie. How you doing?
Paul, you're such a generous guy. I didn't deserve something that elaborate. I hate the word esteemed. I'm just glad you didn't have me on episode 13.
Look, think of this. You're called esteemed. I'm called venerable, which is just old. They just mean old, right? So we're stuck, man. What can I tell you? But I'd rather be esteemed than venerable. Let's just say that, right? So the only one, look, I mean, Vinny, you do have a downside. You know what it is, right?
Uh, Several, just one.
No, no,
So,
one significant one. Tampa Bay Ray fan.
I, you know, what can I say? You got to admire somebody who spends 1/10 the Yankees payroll and still
Oh,
manage to beat the crap out of them.
honestly, the biggest thorn in the Yankees side is probably the Rays, right? Not the Red Sox. We can beat them. We have just insane amount of difficulty beating the Rays, and I don't think there's a particular, let's say, love lost between the two, right? So between the two teams, they seem to not like each other very much.
But
You
the good news is they come down here for spring training, and it's probably the best small little stadium in MLB. So,
Oh, I don't doubt
it's
it.
not all bad. It's not all bad.
I don't. Oh, I really don't doubt it. I just look. I had to say it. So let's get underway. You're the one who brought this up to me. Okay, and I love this idea. I mean, look. I mean, putting pure politics aside, which is obviously a big part of the world's environment at the moment. Um, the world's on the one hand, economies are flourishing, other economies are falling apart. The uh, the inequalities are getting larger. At the same time, science and technology advance is enormous, absolutely enormous in terms of the evolution and solution to things that we never thought could be solved. Now they're being solved in weeks. I mean, I just even go back all the way to probably the paradigm of all this, which was COVID, which was a horrible pandemic that killed millions, and yet we instead of 7 years, the normal route to vaccines, we did in what, 4 months, 5 months. I mean, those kind of changes are dramatic. Yet you, me, all our brethren, we are constantly we're doing what we do. We're moving on. We're writing about things. We're speaking about things. We're talking about things. We're being sometimes obnoxiously critical, sometimes reasonably critical. We continue, but it's got to impact us in some ways that are going to be probably important either very soon or a little later. I mean, what do you see there? Because how do
So,
you
so
think about it?
Paul, I want to cover three topics. I want to talk about the history of industry analysts because a lot of people, they've known us old farts for a while, but they don't know how the industry analyst world evolved. Okay. So let me go through that first and say, I think, and I'm going to make a controversial statement. I think the industry analyst model, at least the Gartners, the Forresters, the IDCs, peaked out somewhere in the 90s. Okay. Since then, there have been a new generation of analysts, you, me, I'll talk about that, right? But even we are not keeping up with the changes that are happening in the world. Okay. And I'll compare us to what I'm seeing with geopolitical advisors, what we're seeing with um, vertical specialists like energy followers and so on. In the IT world, we're not doing that well, Paul. So some of it is positive, some of it is shaking us up, some of it is going to talk about vendor AR and what they have gotten used to. We've kind of become a little timid, and they want us to primarily just say nice things. So let me go through all that. Let's start with the history, though. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's start with history. So I'm working on a book as usual. I'm always working on some book. This thing looks at the origins of IT and the origin of industry analysts. Okay, ours is a very young profession. You know, in the 70s, Yankee Group was started in the 70s. Gartner was founded in 79. In the 70s, nobody really knew what industry analysts meant.
I didn't.
80s somewhat better, but who enterprises used to turn to? They used to turn to strategy firms like Nolan Norton. I don't know if you'd heard of Nolan Norton, or
No.
Index that CSC acquired. Okay, these firms used to help companies look at value of IT, cost of IT. Companies didn't know how to deal with that, right? And accounting firms used to help them make software decisions. They would run evaluations and so on. Brian Summer did that at Accenture. I did that at Pricewaterhouse. That was the 80s. Gardeners of Foresters weren't influential as yet. Okay. The 90s was where they really took off. And I had a front row seat for the second half of that. I was at Gardner from 95 to 2000. My God, Paul, in terms of influence, if you look back and you go, what all did Gardner bring to the world? The hype cycle, magic quadrants, total cost of ownership concepts, right? The categories, ERP, CRM, SCM, all coined by Gartner in that phase. That's a pretty impressive uh, body of work because it's still using those terms.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. But the fact is, that's the 90s. Now, what happened in the 2000s? People like you and I, and the enterprise regulars that you and I were part of, have spawned firms like Diginomica and Constellation Group and HFS, Phil First firm, and so on, right? But I look at your model, Paul. I look at what you've done, right? You have had a very disciplined CRM watch list, which is what an analyst does, right? You make vendors, you torture them before you come up with your final answer, which is what an analyst is supposed to do. Look at the books you've written. My God,
Funny.
J.K. Rowling and James Michener would be jealous of the size of your books.
I'm just
Don't-
still
don't-
laughing
don't-
at the idea of torturing them.
Don't be modest. Look at what you've done with the video channels you have. Look at your blogs. You are the new generation analyst that we saw in the last decade, and I'm similar, right? I've written not just four, Paul. I've written 9 books. Several are not in my name, but I've written 9 books. Okay.
Well, okay. I've read 4, I guess is what it is. I didn't even know you wrote some of these other ones.
but again, I run advisories. I write books. I've written thousands of blogs.
Yes.
I've,
You still, by the way, I'm going to run that banner again. Deal Architect, one of my favorite blogs of all time. Actually, the blog your first book is pretty much, I guess, named after New Polymath. That when you did that blog, what did you call it? Was it called the New Polymath or what was
it's
it
called
called?
New Florence, New Renaissance.
That's right, New Florence. That was probably my favorite blog of all time. I loved. You were the first, and look. I mean, we could sit here and probably praise each other all day, but I'm going to praise you right now on this one. The reality is that blog, that was the first analyst blog I saw that stepped outside the fake guidelines, meaning what we thought we were supposed to do, and you stepped outside those guidelines and you covered things that I think are, well, let's say this, it helped inspire how I handled the watch list. I'll put it that way.
That's very, very nice of you, Paul. The reality is people are still very, very siloed and very, very focused, right? So
Yep.
I failed in the sense that I haven't made them broaden their horizons yet. Still trying. But, take a look at how things have changed, right? When I was at Gartner, we were the big swinging, ones back then.
Yeah.
I did in the 5 years I did there. I did 10,000 one-on-one client calls. Gartner used to measure
In 5 years?
Yeah, Gartner used to measure us with all kinds of metrics: client calls, number of pages written, number of slides created, and all that. They were metric crazy.
That's like 7 a day for every day.
2,000 a year. We had a system that would log every call. Okay, that's
Unbelievable.
how I know. Now, what happened was, and they would talk to me about, hey, Vinny, we're looking at this short list of client server products. Will help us with some negotiation ideas, help us with some SI ideas, very broad range. The good news with that was when you get so many data points, Magic Quadrants right yourself. It's like 50% of the queries are coming related to SAP, only 10% are related to Oracle. What does that tell me, right? Now, if you look at Gartner, Gartner's moved to your model. They have vendors fill out long survey forms. Takes the poor vendors sometimes 4 or 5 months to fill them out. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
I have
But
no
first
complaint.
party data, market signals are usually the best way to be able to be ahead of the market,
Yep.
right? So, to me, we are not leading the market enough. Um, Gartner's still very strong. Don't get me wrong, strong in IT areas. Forrester's still very strong in edgy areas. So, Gen AI, IDC is still strong, but they're not exactly setting the world on fire. Okay, so
Well,
I don't want
to your point, the institutional analysts to me, which is what I call those three in particular. I mean, I look at it, institutional analysts, boutique firms like Constellation, Futurum, things like that, and then the independents like you, me, Josh, Greenbaum, others, Brent, obviously, Leary, and so on and so forth. Um, every one of them has a different, as a class, let's call it, has a different role to play. I mean, look, there's no question neither you nor I nor any independent is going to get as many customer queries as Gartner gets, right? It's
but
just
they
not
don't seem to, at this point, I don't think they're getting that much. Okay, which
really.
is why they're moving to your survey model. Okay, otherwise they don't need to talk to vendors. They would say, we got enough data points, guys. This is the way we see the world. Okay, so I think that's changed. I may be wrong, but I think it's changed. But more importantly, this is what's happened. ERP was coined in the 90s. CRM was coined in the 90s. They haven't been very disciplined in evolving the concepts, right? And so vendors are taking advantage. I mean, if you listen to Larry Ellison talk to Wall Street every quarter, he will say, our finance and HR are doing so well. We're dominating the ER market. ERP is way more than HR and finance, but he's narrowed it down to what suits him, right? Other vendors will do similar. You talk to a number of vendors who say, hey, Vinny, we are focused on the service economy. And I go, great. What are you doing in industrials like Rolls-Royce Aviation, which is selling more maintenance, more monitoring, using digital twins and so on? They don't sell an engine anymore. They basically lease an engine to an airline and only charge them if there's a takeoff and then charge them by the hour. They move to a service model. And these vendors will say, oh, that's manufacturing. We don't cover manufacturing. So, the definitions suit them. And the vendors and the analysts haven't been disciplined about it to say, guys, no, 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 no. We decide the definition of ERP, not you. Okay. Um, and they haven't kept up with verticals, right? I mean, I was in your show, one of your shoes. I can't keep up. The fascinating thing about you, Paul, is not just your backgrounds. Your formats keep changing, your titles keep changing. You are constantly evolving. Please
Well,
don't.
look, look, I'm 74. It's not like I have the rest of my life is a lot shorter than a lot of the rest of our friends' lives out there. So the idea is to do as much as I can to try to create a different way of looking at things and that is usable as opposed to says, look at me. That's not the idea. The idea is how to create something that's usable by others so that that might work, right? I can't can never guarantee anything will work, but
All I wanted to say was don't change. Keep
oh,
evolving.
I have no reason to. I'm happy. But look, I got a number of threads of questions I want to ask you here. So
Okay.
there's a few things that kind of you point out here. One is you have the institutional analysts, of course, the big guys, and I think one of the problems I see with a lot of the vendors to this day, and is that they don't get, even though I agree with you that we, meaning independents as well, have to move a lot faster in terms of figuring out all these shifts toward industries and everything else. I mean, look, to be perfectly blunt, I think SAP's CX model of just industries, only vertical, is stupid. And again, I'm not asking you to agree or disagree. That said, one thing I've always admired SAP about is they got industries. They never misunderstood the value of industries. They always knew it. And but then again, as things evolve, it's incumbent on you, me, other analysts, regardless of their industry, boutique, whatever, or institution, boutique, or whatever, to let them and the world, so to speak, know that we think that this is moving on and we're
Because
slow.
if you don't evolve, we're setting a low bar for vendors.
Okay, so then how do we do that though? How do analysts, with the idea that we have to approach the vendors as part of this, meaning we have to talk to them. How do analysts and that a lot of vendors, and let's even talk more specifically, how do we as independent analysts, because we're a pretty big group now as far as it goes. There's a lot of us. I have a list, by the way. I was once looking at creating independent analyst association. So we had like joint power. And I have a list of 77 independent analysts that I know. Something like that. That's a lot of analysts just in our world. Okay. So how do we
let me answer
do
this.
this? How do we get to these guys? How do we change? How do we, when they don't want to even, like, a lot of the companies just think magic quadrant wave, and that's all they can think. How do you get to those vendors with these new ideas?
So let's first talk about the vendor AR role, right? To me, there is a basic, not problem, but I would love to see vendor AR have a dotted line to product engineering. They're too much part of marketing, therefore they only want influence, not intelligence, right? To me, a good analyst tells you what you're doing wrong,
Yes.
tells you what the competitive marketplace is, tells you where the buck is going, right? They don't want that. They basically want you and me to say, you guys are doing wonderfully,
right?
Because that's what they're compensated for, right? So I think there is a fundamental change that vendors need to make is either move AR out of marketing, which will never happen, but at least have them become some responsibility of product engineering. And therefore, then they can push us to say, Paul, tell me what's going on in Indonesia. And you can say, yeah, I don't know, but I can tell you one of the independents who can, right? So there are two dimensions, actually there are three dimensions we should be expanding into. And Gartner and the institutional guys should also be moving into. One is verticals, right? I mean, in the last 5 years, the book that I wrote for 2 SAP executives, Business as Unusual, we saw 100 edge applications become viable. Let me give you a couple of examples. Telemedicine and healthcare.
Yeah.
Okay. During COVID, suddenly you needed that, right? EV battery management and billing for utilities. 5 years ago, you couldn't sell that. Today, every one of them is looking at it. If you're a retailer, you need what's called intelligent returns. You don't want an associate deciding, should I take this back? Should I restock it? No, it needs to be like mindless, like going into Whole Foods and saying, here's my Amazon purchase, take it back. And they take all the reverse logistics over, okay? So all these are viable applications today. We identified 100 of them across industries.
Wow.
Okay. Why aren't other analysts talking about these? I've been talking about it for 2 years now.
Well, you to your credit, you've always been someone looking at the cutting edge, so to speak. Cutting edge means not the bleeding edge, because that's usually bleeds into death, but cutting edge, which means at times those outliers become the thing, right? It become mainstream, right? And those are the most important things about. And you've always dug in there, but that's partly also why other analysts aren't talking about it, because you actually have known that and made a point of it for a long time.
But if you agree with my premise that we need to lead the market,
yes, right? I do.
Then we need to be edgy, right? And let me give you another dimension: globalization. It's become, in the last year, I've been studying it a lot. If you talk to multinationals, they'll go, we've never seen so much change in our country portfolios. We moved out of Argentina because of inflation. We were forced to leave Russia. We're strategically balancing out China. It's called China Plus One strategies, okay? And they go, Vinny, when I go ask vendors, what are you doing in Vietnam? Because that's my China balance strategy. Very few of them know anything. So I have to go then talk to my accounting firms. I have to go talk to my global risk advisors. I have to go talk to attorneys. How do we localize for Vietnam? Okay. As analysts, we should be ahead of that and saying, okay, I'm not going to have a magic quadrant for Vietnam, but I can have it for the Asian countries, right? Very, very specific. At least we're getting close. Just to talk about magic quadrants on a global basis is useless, right?
Well, yeah, you know what? You're right, and I will tell you, to your point, one of the one of the one of the things that underlies what you're talking about, and this is one of the things I really think is important, is we're dealing with a world of 8 billion human beings, each of whom is somewhat individual, each of whom is individual, obviously by definition. Um, but we're also dealing with a world of cultures, multiple cultures, and those cultures impact everything. Everything. There's nothing that a culture of a nation or even of a region in a nation doesn't impact, even if it's the way they do IT, for example, whatever it is. But and I think,
But
to
Paul,
your
nothing
point,
stops us from expanding our independent ecosystem to include regional folks. I mean, Zoho has shown us they
right?
invite people from all over the world, right?
Well, they're the one company I know that truly gets it, right? You know how it used to manifest itself way back when we were first beginning. For example, I remember all the way back. I think this is when NetSuite went to the cloud, right? That's how far back. They were there ahead of Salesforce, right? So they went to the cloud, and then the next thing they started talking about was their multi-language versions. That was the first manifestation of difference in a lot of these things. I thought about that a long time ago. Now, to your point, that has to evolve beyond that. And then the second manifestation, which is I don't think known by too many people, was Clarabridge. Clarabridge is something unique. And aside from the fact they did 11-point sentiment analysis rather than 5, what they did it in 24 languages, but because it was sentiment analysis, they had to account for the cultures that underlaid each of those languages, because the words in those cultures it could be the same words in English, or the sentiment in that culture meant something different relative to the culture, compared to, say, what we think. So they had to account for that. So they had to think in terms of the cultures. But to be
It's
honest,
not just multinationals. You and I were together in India last year, right?
yeah,
India probably has 500 companies now that are like our mid-market, high-end mid-market. Every vendor should want to do business with them. Okay, that's true of the UAE. That's true of um, China. That's true of so many. We're not looking at the world as a big opportunity. Okay. The other thing is, um, I talk to a lot of CEOs and they'll go, Vinny, look, it costs us 10 million to open a new office because they think on a Western model, right? We got to have a direct sales model and so on. I go, no, you don't. You can do a digital channel and start that way. Send an executive there for a couple of years. You don't need to send a big team, right? And they go, well, development is so expensive. And I go, not anymore. Hyperscalers have made Kenya and Estonia and a bunch of other countries extremely adept at DevOps, right? So I think vendors need to change in terms of their global opportunity, but us analysts need to be pushing them. Okay. Uh, yeah, another thing with Gen AI, right? Everybody's talking about Gen AI, and it invariably gets into, well, GPUs and NVIDIA or LLMs and OpenAI. As application analysts, we should be talking use cases, right?
amen.
I had a fascinating conversation with an executive who goes, Vinny, you follow the ERP CRM market. What is wrong with you guys? The use cases you come up with are so cautious. You're doing accounting use cases, HR use cases, chatbots. You go, what? That is only SG&A. Why aren't you guys doing cost of goods sold? And I said, why stop there? Why not do the whole P&L? Every line item of the P&L should be affected by some form of data that is used by Gen AI, right? So we're not thinking big enough. We're looking at our backgrounds and kind of like spray painting a little bit. Okay.
Well, you know what I think part of that is, and again, I know that, and there is a significant group of analysts who do think the way I'm about to describe, but there are also a significant group who don't, which is, and vendors especially who don't, which is, look, I mean, when it boils down to it, and also if you even listen to your own description of this, we're talking about a world of platforms and ecosystems. And that's how you have to think too. It's not just what you produce, it's how you have to think, especially on the ecosystem side. And which is what you're describing. But we face, I think, as analysts, a number of problems. One is there's an incredible number of vendors who don't think like that. They doesn't mean they don't. They may even have a platform, technically, a technology platform, but they don't think in ecosystems. They think in feature function or IT or whatever, and they don't even think in outcomes. Right. So, to your point, ultimately, the only value of any of this stuff that we talk about is how it ends up being practically applied. Other than that, there's no value in it. Right. It's other than that's a nice thought. Right. But it has to be practically applied with an impact that's positive, we hope. But, one of the consistent problems I think you and I have, and every analyst has, is even regardless of how they think, is we're dealing with not just antiquated models in terms of analysts, but antiquated AR models that are just prevalent everywhere. And like when budgets get cut for AR, the only budgets that remain are a seat of Gartner, a seat of Forrester, and that's because of the wave in the MQ, right? And that's it, right? So, but how do you? Okay, so let's, because I want to move on to our final segment after this. But how do we get through to them? What do we do? What do you actually like? What would you propose if you were pulling together a group of, forget independent, all analysts, and regardless of how they're represented, what would you propose that we do to crack through this and to make those changes in our models and in the vendor AR models?
Well, part of it is we have to lead. Part of it is, Paul, I mean, you're a brave man. I am stupidly brave sometimes, but we are timid compared to what I'm seeing in some other sectors. Take the energy sector, right? I know some analysts who 3, 4 years ago started telling the world, guys, solar and wind ain't gonna do it for us. It's only in 5% today. We need nuclear, we need carbon capture, we need hydrogen, we need geothermal and all that. Okay. We need to start to do that too and say, guys, you can't just be going to market with just your model that has worked for 20 years. That's one. You look at geopolitical advisors, they say stuff. They'll outright come out. I know a couple will come out 3, 4 years ago, came out and said China is in deep trouble because of their population pyramid. Germany is in deep trouble because they became too dependent on Russian gas. These guys piss off presidents and dictators. We are afraid to piss off technology CEOs. We've become too timid. That's another thing, probably a controversial statement, but we need to we need to grow a pair. That's another thing I would say. So we need to start leading again. We need to go to the edge of the enterprise. We need to go to the world and so on.
Wait. I want to take that a tiny bit further. Especially we are kind of running out of time because I'm frankly, we could go. I literally could do this for 3 hours with you, 5 hours. So all right, well, no, but here's the deal. One of the problems we have we meaning the entirety of the industry, is there's a lot of people in our world that think what we say is word of God. It's not. It's an opinion. It's an opinion. Okay. Yeah. It's a well-informed opinion. And to me, I'm honored that anybody's even willing to listen to it or pay me for it even sometimes, which is astounding. I mean, I'm a New Yorker. We do that that's DNA. I mean, we're born with it. So wow, you're willing to pay me for my DNA showing up, right? But on the other hand, we don't do any good for them because ultimately, if we're true to our profession or just true to ourselves as humans, we're trying to help them be better, not tear them apart. But there's a lot of people, and we hear it all the time. You go you go to these analyst summits and you hear people who are alpha mailing the crap out of it, right? When they stand up. It's just stupid. Uh, ultimately, so we have to present tough concepts to them in ways though that resonate. Because if all we get is if this is the way it works, here's us and here's them, here's us, revert, and we go and they go, bam, we're dead. We have to be able to go that, right? So that slap them, but
I think both sides need to evolve, right? I think vendors have gotten a little too focused on, Gartner used to talk about influence versus intelligence, right? They need to get back to a blend of saying, from analysts, we should expect influence. I want them to be nice to us when we deserve it, but I also want intelligence from them. I think that it's too skewed towards influence right now. So I'd like AR folks to evolve there. And us, absolutely, we can't just be assholes.
right.
I mean, I'm sorry to use the language,
No,
but
it's okay. We have Bob Stutz as one of our hosts, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about the language.
so yes, absolutely, we need to come together, but there have to be changes on both sides. We have the vendors do expect us should allow us to lead, not just say, I'm going to redefine your definition of ERP,
Right.
and you will accept it, right? So I think
Well,
I think both sides need to evolve.
in closing, before we move to the last segment, I'm going to just remind you of a story because you were actually in this. We were at it, you, me, I think Brent was there, a few other industry analysts were at one of the NetSuite events before it was acquired by Oracle. And we were at a table, and you were there. I do remember that. You and me especially, I remember. And Zach Nelson was sitting with us, and he was defining CRM, and all of us were saying, that's not CRM. That's NetSuite's version of CRM to serve NetSuite very well, right? And
I think he said CRM that doesn't have order management is not CRM, because if it cannot generate revenue, why call it CRM? I think
I think you're right. There was more to it than that, but I think that was one of his tenets, and we're saying that's not how you define CRM, right? And I remember this discussion because it was so funny, and this was what 10, 12 years ago, I think. But all of us, everyone at the table, all the analysts were like pounding at him, right? Because nobody agreed with him there.
I don't think I did. I kind of had a little bit of an agreement with him
on order. Well, no, order management. Look, to be fair, order management impacts customers. There's no question about it. I'm weirdly, I'm not going to say who the advisory client was. I was there until yesterday, right? That's why I kind of hurried into today. But we literally discussed that exact thing, right? Order management, supply chain impact, things like that on customers is part of a shift this company's making. So, it was fascinating. That said, though, it goes to the point that he was defining it because it served NetSuite, and again, their product was actually pretty good. It had nothing to do with that. Their CRM product was actually pretty good, but to your point, my point, and others, it's our job to tell them yes, no, maybe. Well, if you say yes, but only if you do this, that's our job, right?
Brian, Paul, look, you're a big football fan, you're a big baseball fan. Nobody likes referees. But think if the referees did not put their foot down and say, you're out, right? Or if the players constantly argue with them and say, no, I'm not, it won't work. That's the same thing. Our role is to be, I hate to put it, we're partly movie critic, we're partly referee, right? And we're partly coaches, right?
And befitting our age, or at least my age, curmudgeons.
No, look, I've been in this role, started at Pricewaterhouse. They gave me a small unit to run, which was like an internal Gartner group in 1993. So I've been doing this for 30 years. I love the industry. It keeps evolving, but this is a critical time where we need to start thinking beyond older categories.
Amen.
The world has changed so much, and we're still pretending to look at it from the old eyes.
And I am with you. I think major takeaway influence intelligence mix, not just influence. They need to hear what they need to hear. We need to say what we need to say. And they need to come back at us. If they don't want to hear it, they need to come back and tell us that so we can continue to say what we need to say.
And Paul, it doesn't need to be in the public domain. We should
No.
have these conversations one-on-one, right?
Yes, sir.
So they don't feel like we are being
Yeah.
whatever.
We're doing it to alpha them and to prove how tough we are.
Exactly. And,
Right.
and you know, they get to hear it one-on-one. I mean, that's the ideal setting.
We have to, let's say this, we have to be nicely blunt.
One of the nicest things you told me a few years ago was very never go around AR, even though you may have a personal relationship with an executive.
Never.
Respect their role, right?
Yes.
That is great attitude to have. I think it needs to be much more honest conversations.
Amen. All right. Now, thank you, sir. I mean, that was, I think I'm only monthly right now, so it might be a few months, but I'm going to have you back if you don't mind. And then we continue this discussion to see, also to kind of do a little bit of a checkup to see if we've done any of this, right? See how it's going. All right. But there is one final segment, which we need to get to, which was the world famous Something I Really. All right. In this segment, for those of you who don't know, Vinny's going to tell us something we start with dislike and we end with something he really likes. So we go out on a high note on the show, but we're going to start with something he dislikes. So Vinny, tell us something you really dislike.
Well, Paul, it is, we're all curmudgeons, right? At any given point, we'll have multiple dislikes. Right now, Margaret and I have been going through a lot of financial advisors looking at, long-term estate planning, retirement planning, and so on. And so I've been updating our asset balance sheets and cash flows and so on. And it really brought to surface how much I dislike insurance companies because they cost a lot of money. They cost us a lot of money. And when you look at each one of them, you go, what the hell is going on? And I live in Florida where home insurance is broken. And you go, it shouldn't be. There are multiple causes, but I can look at each one of them and say, I would fix it this way. You look at life insurance, you and I, they'll say, oh, I'm not over 70, but they probably tell you you're over 70, you have to pay this much. Hold on a minute. Your actuaries know lifespans have been growing. Have your actuaries factored that into your rates? You look at how cars have become safer and safer with sensors and so on. What do the insurance companies do? They'll turn around and say, well, the cost of repairs has gone up, therefore the insurance rate needs to go up. They've got all this data that tells us things are better, but they never pass it along.
No.
So,
amen, sir.
I mean, I don't want to pick on them, but right now they're on my dislike.
The whole idea of this is pick on something, right? So go right ahead, pick on them. Look, I'm with you. Look, we were Geico customers for 30 years. Our rates got so high, even though we had no accidents, nothing wrong. Our rates got so high, we switched off to the Hartford, which carries my business insurance. And we had a great rate, and it's been going up $200 a year every year since we had it. So now it's in four figures again. It was under four figures, right? I drive, look, think of it this way. I have a BMW. I bought it for safety and for radio, basically. Entertainment, because I'm stuck in traffic all the time. I'm not a fan of driving. So in 10 years, I've driven 25,000 total miles with that car, which is literally almost nothing. And yet my insurance keeps going up and up. I haven't gotten tickets. I haven't gotten into accidents, but it doesn't matter.
Well, it's the same thing, Florida and home insurance, right? There's hurricanes are growing. Statistically, there are a certain number of named storms a year. Only a certain number hit landfall, and only a certain ones affect Florida. Okay, so I mean, that's what I'm saying. The numbers, they have all the numbers. They just use whatever justification they need to justify higher rates. So anyway, let's not dwell on them.
No, let's move to something you actually like. Okay, then that's the way. It's always that's the way we like ending the show, is because we go out on a positive note. So what do you like?
I really like, we live in the white collar world. Sometimes we are not respectful enough of tradespeople, people who work with their hands, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be blue collar in manufacturing or trade.
Right.
It could be people who are cooking, chefs, and anybody who's good with their hands. I'd like to tell people I have 5 thumbs on each hand. I am useless with my hands. Okay. So I've always been very fond of, people who can, carpenters, electricians who do a good job. Okay. And unfortunately, in our world, even when we look at AI now, we're looking at all the white collar applications. I like to look at broader and say, talk to me about humanoid robots. How do we make every worker, especially the people who are doing the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs, how do we make them more productive? Okay, so I'm going to name a couple of people here that most of us know. I look at Jeff Nolan. Jeff. I know
Very
Jeff.
well. Sure.
My God, the guy. He wrote in my. I have a column where I invite people to write about their passions. 5 or 6 years ago, he wrote about woodworking. Okay. Last year, he wrote about his ranching. He's got a farm now. Okay. And I go, and he's still continuing to be a marketing person in technology. And you go, I really admire somebody like him. Another example, Sandy Lowe, right? Fantastic with the piano. God, one of the best mothers you have.
Yes.
Travels around the world with the family. How the hell did she do all that, right? So I admire people who are, blue collar, definitely, but people who are just multidimensional in life.
Well,
Okay.
to that multidimensionality, my second show today at 7 o'clock tonight's Engage with Paul and Kenny. Kenny being the former head of Golden State Warrior marketing. We're calling the show the Three Mics, and it's three people I think at least one or two of them. Michael Krigsman, Michael Fawcett, and Michael Thomas, who's the former president of CRM Association, customer success leader. But you know what the show's about? Photography. All three of them are incredible, and I mean like at a pro level, incredible photographers. And
I knew Krigsman was. I didn't realize Fawcett is.
Fawcett, and Mike Fawcett is also characterized by the fact he has over 100 cameras. But his and Michael Thomas is
I don't
basically
know.
well, Michael's an he was one of the I think he was the second president of the CRM Association back in the day. Was the first customer success person at Microsoft back in their early days. Is now working for actually Boingo, right? But he is an astounding both bird photographer and I'll call it a Black history photographer. He's absolutely extraordinary at it. And all three of them have, if they wanted to be professionals in photography, they could be. It's not even a question. So tonight's show is, okay, you guys are all in our world, but let's talk photography, right? And that's what I mean. That to your point, this multidimensional human being, again, to your point of you forever, a polymath, not really literally, but let's say approaching the beginnings of a polymath, right? So it's right to it's been your theme forever, right? So thank you, sir. That was, of course, wonderful.
Paul, you are a very generous host. You invite me.
Oh, I love having you on. It's great. We always have a good conversation. Thank you. And everyone, Vinnie will be back and we will see where we've come since this conversation in terms of being bold or growing a pair.
Paul, wait till you hear. I've said a few controversial things. I've used some foul language. Maybe they don't want me back. So
again, not foul language. Not we've had it all, and we are not governed by the FCC here. We may be a network, but not that kind, right? So we're good. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I'll see you in a month.
Go Rays.
Well, no, not that. Oh, baseball season starts tomorrow. The Yankees are playing Houston, actually in Houston. at 4 p.m. for those of you who want to watch it, which is everybody, right? Right. All right. So we'll see you. And I think we will we'll take it out. Mashed up, broken into two. I didn't know I was pretty till I took a look at you and I'm rolling. Yeah, I'm still rolling. Baby, there ain't nothing I can lose and I still got the blues that I'm rolling. Hey!
This has been a Players Productions Network digital broadcast.